All right, good morning, gang. How y'all doing? Good to see y'all here today. I think we got everybody. Are we good? Somebody give me a high sign. We're good? Awesome. We'll get this thing underway. So super privileged to be here and chat with y'all today. Um, so we're here to talk a little bit about military leadership in extreme environments. And I think we'll start by just kind of framing who we are, a little bit about what we're about, and we'll get into the panel just a little bit. So I'm Colonel Brian Novoselic, um, from Michigan originally. Went to the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1992. Graduated in 1996. Started my career in the Army. I'm an armor officer, so that's tanks and Bradleys and really heavy stuff. So during my time in the Army, I spent time in Bosnia, Kosovo, did operational deployments there, and then combat deployments in Iraq. I was a troop commander during the invasion in 2003, and then went back a few years later to Iraq a second time, and then did a tour in Afghanistan before I went and got a PhD. And so my day job now, I teach mechanical engineering at West Point, and I do strategic planning for them. And I'll be remiss if I didn't mention and embarrass my son. I think he's running around here somewhere, Andrew Novoselic, soon to be graduate of this fine institution. And I'll tell you, I am really in love with this institution. The opportunities you all have, and the brotherhood, and what you're learning while you're at this place beyond the academics and the sports, but just the teamwork and the camaraderie you're learning while you're a part of this experience is truly fantastic, and I hope you appreciate what you've got at this fine institution. So our privilege to be here today. I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel retired Josh Richardson to talk a little bit about himself.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Josh Richardson. It is an honor to be here with you. By way of introduction, what brings me here is I spent 23 years in the United States Army. I'm a husband and a father and a leader in the Army, and I'm still learning how to lead. I was TK's classmate at West Point. We were great friends, and by virtue of knowing him and knowing a lot of the people that he has impacted, Don Bosco has become part of my consciousness. Today's the first day I've ever stepped foot on the place, but it's an honor to be here to talk with you a little bit on this panel. And if we do our job right, you'll be asking us some questions about this leadership thing that we're talking about. I mentioned did 23 years in the Army, but the last thing I'll leave you with, part of my story, kind of a little bit about me as we sit in a gym like this. The game of basketball brought me to the Army. I went to West Point to play college basketball. I knew I was going to go in the Army too, but I didn't know that much about the Army. I learned about it as I went. But as I reflect back, raise your hand if you play pickup ball? Ever played any pickup ball in the park, whether it's basketball or your other sport? Keep your hands up if you play a lot of pickup ball. That was me. I played a lot of pickup ball when I was your age. And why am I saying that? Because as I look back and I think about the dynamics around that, you playing pickup ball, you got to win to stay on the court. You got to win to survive. And you don't know who's going to show up at the park on that day. We show up at the park, and we have to learn very quickly what your strengths are and what my weaknesses are. We got to make a team. We got to win. And so sports led me into the Army. The Army was a fulfilling career that I feel only fortunate to have had, and these things kind of run together for me. So I look forward to a discussion with you this morning.
All right, thanks, Josh. Let me turn it over to Colonel retired John Yahorchik.
I'm John Yahorchik. I was an orthopedic surgeon in the Army. I'm part of the 50-year affiliate class, so I graduated in 1975. I applied to West Point during the height of the Vietnam War, and all my classmates in high school thought I was crazy. Went to West Point, spent 5 years as an armor officer, then went to med school up in Albany Med, and then came back in the Army and spent the rest of my career in the Army. I was the orthopedic surgeon during Black Hawk Down in Somalia in 1993. Subsequently was recruited to work for Special Operations Command and spent the next 10 years living at West Point, but getting a phone call saying, "Hey, mister, come to work." My wife, God bless her, raised our 3 kids who all are academy grads from 8, 9, and 11. And then towards the end, I was over in Tuzla Air Base. We were getting ready to do something when the trade centers went down. I was getting ready to retire, but I said, I'm not retiring now. Stayed on a couple more years, went into Afghanistan in November, December, back in June and July, and then started the war in Iraq in 2003. The last mission was the Jessica Lynch rescue mission, so it was a way to end a career.
Yeah, so one connection I'll make between John and I. So when I was a cadet, John was my sponsor, him and his family. So at West Point, they have sponsor families. So you can sign up to be assigned to a military family, and I got blessed to get linked up with the Horchik family, and that meant I got to take refuge from the barracks when they invited me over, and got to have a home cooked meal and learn what it's like to be a military family, interacting with them. And I distinctly remember the invitations kind of ceased my second year there, and I found out that John had deployed to Somalia, and so I didn't get to see him for a year, and he came back, and we got to reconnect when he got back. But just to put in reference, he mentioned Black Hawk Down. How many of you have seen the movie? Raise your hands if you've seen the movie Black Hawk Down. A few of y'all. You remember the scene at the end of the movie where there's a surgery room, in the hospital? They start bringing in the injured soldiers and they start working on them. So Colonel Retired John Yahorchik was the attending physician in that hospital, and he'll talk a little bit about some of those experiences today. But he processed more casualties through that hospital in about 2 days than any hospital had since Vietnam, and so really did some incredible work. He's super humble about it, but he went through a lot in that experience. And so let me just frame the talk for you a little bit. And we're talking about leadership in extreme, military environments. So we're talking about the kinds of leadership that's involved when people's life, health, safety are at risk, when resources are scarce, when the conditions are extreme, and when chaos and confusion is typically a part of things. And you got a mission to accomplish. You got to make fast decisions to maintain momentum, and it's a super fluid situation. And there's a military philosopher calls it the fog of war, and goes on to say that that's what makes everything about military operations hard. And so those are the kind of environments when we talk about leadership experiences. That's the specific context we're talking about today. And so just to kind of give you some real world examples, I'll turn it over to you, John, first. Just talk about, when we talk about extreme environments, military leadership, what kind of comes to mind? Any experiences you've had?
So I'll talk a little bit about Black Hawk Down. And one of the things that Josh had mentioned was a pickup team where you got to learn on the fly what's going on. So when they bring a military hospital together, there's all the enlisted soldiers that can set up the tents, do the cleaning of the instruments, do all that sort of stuff. But what they call the professional staff, the doctors, the nurses, the respiratory technicians, they can't just sit in a unit not doing anything. They all have active jobs at hospitals across the United States. We're called in at the last minute, and all of a sudden we are thrown into the mix. We reported on the 1st of August, and on the 11th of August, I was standing in Mogadishu, which I still didn't even know how to spell it at that point. So you're all of a sudden thrown in, and you have to develop a team rapidly. And, there's been casualties from the hospitals before you, and things have been going on. So you just sort of have to respond to that fairly quickly and start learning each other's strengths and weaknesses. One of the things our deputy commander did that I thought was he's one of the unsung heroes, is he put a line and told the surgeons they can't go into the emergency room until called. And if you've ever known a surgeon, there are no type B surgeons, okay? We're all intense type A, capital A, bold letters, and we wanted to do our job. And he made us stop. He goes, there will be a day when every one of you will be in the operating room, and the emergency room staff needs to do the triage, put in the difficult chest tubes and do that stuff. And he was right. And he knew the value of training and repetition and doing it over and over again. So that was the situation we were in on 3 October. I did 22 surgeries in 34 hours with the help of our crew, about 20 people there. And so it was definitely stressful that night, and you saw all sort of human interactions as far as how did they respond to death and destruction that they had never, ever seen before. So that was the situation we were in October.
All right, thanks, John. Yeah, Josh, let me, what kind of an edge do you have?
Yeah, so what we're talking about here, to make sure it's grounded, the way that I think about it is leadership in extreme environments. What do we mean by extreme? We mean uncertain. Now, you guys know what that feels like. You step into uncomfortable and uncertain things in your walk here at Don Bosco. We sit here telling some stories and imparting some things, and I'll tell a story about a piece of uncertainty that I experienced. But I want to make sure you're coming along with us here. Extreme military. We're just talking about things where you don't really know what's happening, and we're going to hopefully impart some wisdom on like how you deal with that effectively. And we've learned along the way. John mentioned his last mission was a POW rescue mission, a prisoner of war, in the early part of the war in Iraq. Rescue mission happened to be my first. This is a funny segue. That was my first mission in the Army, combat mission. So we shared different roles in that mission. But I was on a team in that mission. I was in the 2nd Ranger Battalion, which, to put it into context for you, is a very, very elite Army unit, highly trained, highly ready. And I had come from a different kind of Army unit, and I've been selected to move into the Ranger Regiment. It's kind of like moving from the farm team to the major leagues. And I'm not trying to put down the other unit I was in. Great soldiers there too, but this was just different. So I was nervous. It was uncertain for me. And on top of that, here we find ourselves getting ready we were preparing to launch a rescue mission for a prisoner of war. And what I did is I had my role had to do with making sure that our unit understood all of the support assets that we had, the helicopters, the jets, the different things that we could bring to bear based on the mission. And part of that job, my job was to brief this and to explain it as part of our preparation. But I'm in this new unit that they're all great, and I'm stepping up into the major leagues. I briefed it the same way that I had learned in school a couple years prior, and I did the year before in the other kind of unit. So leadership in extreme situations, leadership in uncertainty. What I say from this little video, and it went well. My briefing went well. I was commended for it. I was told by people that I respected highly that it was very good. And it's important to get this stuff right, because after you're done talking, you go put your stuff on and you fly into the fight. So I felt really relieved that people thought I did my job well. So what I would impart to you then, my lesson here is trust your training. Don't change yourself based on the situations change. I trusted my training. I did it the same way that I'd been trained to do, even though the situation was quite different.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And I'll share a quick vignette. It's my first mission when I was in Iraq as troop commander at the front end of the 4th Infantry Division, moving through Baghdad, and we were about ready to go into our first fight. And I had tanks and Bradleys with me, and we're getting ready to finally launch into the fight. And we'd done a lot of training before we got started and got over there. And one of the things the Army can't train you for is civilians on the battlefield. And if you picture it, we were going over a canal on the north side of Baghdad, had to go secure an airfield. And the population of Baghdad was fleeing out of Baghdad because we had invaded from the south, and so everybody was going north, as we were. And so I distinctly remember, if you think about Route 17 in rush hour, now picture tanks and Bradleys interspersed between there and having to go fight the enemy. Right? That's kind of the situation we found ourselves in, which was something we had not trained. And the first thing that came to my mind, and none of my soldiers had fired a round in anger, is that they need to know that it's okay to shoot. When the time is right, they've got to know it's okay to shoot, because that's our job. And so I distinctly remember got over that canal, and I'm like, all right, how am I going to do this? Because I can't just shoot wildly. That would look silly, right? And we had helicopters overhead. And as soon as I got over the canal, I saw an anti-aircraft gun, sitting in a field right across the canal. And I told the pilots, on the radio, say, hey, we got anti-aircraft guns. They're unmanned, but watch out, right? And so to add to that, I marked the target with my machine gun. So I just told them, hey, watch my tracers. And so shot my machine gun at the anti-aircraft gun so they could see exactly where it was. And every fifth round in a machine gun's got something in the back that burns so you can see where the rounds are going. So they could see that. And it gave me a way for my troop to see the commander shooting. And if the commander's doing it, it's okay, right? And I had to find that experience. And you know, it was kind of that signal like, hey, fellas, we're at war. And, you know, you got to do what you got to do to be successful. And so that's, you know, it's just knowing where your organization is and what they need at a certain time and then finding a way to make it happen. So that was, you know, a very early experience I had in some of my combat time. So I'd like to offer it up. As we go through things today, I think it is more effective to answer questions you have in your minds and thoughts that you are having. So at any time, we've got some things that we've kind of scripted to talk through. But if you've got questions, you know, please raise your hand and ask at any time while we go through this. And we're happy to meet you where you are and you know, help you along the way as well. But let me open up with a topic. You know, leadership is all about influencing others. It's a human process of influence to get a group towards accomplishing common goals. And part of that is interaction and how you deal with others. And we all, as graduates of West Point, had to memorize a definition of discipline. It's called Schofield's definition of discipline. As freshmen or plebes at West Point, it's required knowledge. You had to recite it. And it basically says that the discipline required, the discipline which makes the soldiers of a free country reliable in battle is not to be gained by harsh or tyrannical treatment. On the contrary, such treatment is far more likely to destroy than to make an army. And he goes on to talk about how leaders can inspire an intense desire to obey if the leader treats the soldiers with respect that they deserve. And you can impart in soldiers an intense desire to disobey if you disrespect them in the way you treat them. And, you know, required knowledge for us. And so kind of open it up with what it looks like to interact with others in times of crisis, you know, in extreme environments. And so I guess, Josh, if I'm open up with you to talk about some experiences with that.
So as I think about the importance of communication in extreme situations, what I would share with you is first of all, just to ground ourselves, extreme situations. What do we mean by that? Most fundamentally, we're talking about uncertainty, as I mentioned earlier. So when things are uncertain, it's very important to communicate clearly and calmly. The definition that Colonel Novoselic just read really calls to mind for me. There's the two key ways of communication we're talking about are verbal and nonverbal. And if we're on a team, if I'm on a team with you and the situation is very fluid and uncertain, I need to be effective and calm in my communication with you. Raising my voice and like screaming and losing my temper and being erratic is not helpful in extreme situations. And I've learned that, and that's not to say that there's not a time for raising your voice. There is. Like I said earlier, I came up playing sports. I've come up in the military. I've got no problem with raised voices, and there's a time for it. And what I would share with you is most often, if the effective leader is raising his or her voice, it's because they are very comfortable in what's going on. So they're comfortable enough to raise their voice to get my attention, to bring me to them. And used effectively, that can be fine. But more to the point of this conversation, when things are uncertain, that's when we need to be the most calm and the most measured. And then the other thing I'll leave this piece with and pass it over to Colonel Warchek is this is also about us treating each other well, treating each other like we want to be treated. How am I going to scream at you as your leader and expect you to follow me? No, I'm going to communicate effectively to you. And then with that, you're going to return that respect to me, and as a team, we're going to be stronger.
John, thoughts?
So, you know, being a surgeon, The surgeon is the captain of the ship, so to speak, in the operating room. And you have to be the person that's totally in charge. And you've seen movies and stuff where the surgeon's screaming and carrying on and stuff. That's an ineffective operating room. That's where bad things are going to happen. And you just need to be controlled, say what you're going to say, and understand what's going on. Unfortunately, you're like the duck, the picture of the duck that's on the pond and the water's nice and calm, but underneath the little feet are going 100 miles an hour because you're stressed in there. And if things aren't going well, the more things aren't going well, the calmer you have to be. And, I prided myself in being one of those people that rarely ever raised their voice in the operating room. And the couple times I raised my voice in the operating room, the chief nurse came in because she knew things had gone wrong that were rightfully wrong, and that I wasn't like Chicken Little running around all the time saying, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. When I said the sky is falling, yes, the sky is falling, and we better be prepared to do something about that. And I think that's the credibility you get, is by staying calm, that when you do have to raise that tempo a little bit, people understand that, yes, we're now getting into a critical situation and they need to be paying a little more attention than what they're doing.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I'll share an experience I had. My second tour in Iraq, and our squadron was training Iraqi soldiers at a camp over in northern Iraq, and we had our worst fear happened one day. We had we called a green on blue, and it was an Iraqi soldier that had a weapon and was killing American soldiers. We had one killed and one injured that we knew of, and weren't sure what the environment was going on. And I made it down the operations center down in this camp where we were training, and our sergeant major, who is typically the bedrock of the organization, right? Every enlisted soldier looks up to this guy. He was having he wasn't having a great day, and he had soldiers being killed under his watch, and he quite frankly lost his mind, and was super anxious, yelling, and it had become counterproductive. And as the second in command of the squadron, I had to do something to fix it. And I realized I could not do something to call him out in front of the soldiers all around, and I couldn't undermine his credibility. And so I had to do something to get him out of the situation. And I remember telling him, "Hey, Sergeant Major, could you really? I need you to do something for me. We can't get a hold of the hospital. We're going to need an ambulance. Can you go to the combat hospital and get us an ambulance?" And he just looked at me and said, "Yeah, I can do that." And so he got in his truck and he went off and took care of that. And I got him out of the situation. And because of him, the temperature in that operations center was high. People were stressed and people were fumbling around. And I distinctly remember thinking, I gotta lower the temperature in here right now. And I went to our radio telephone operator. First thing I thought to do, she was sitting behind the radio, and their job is to listen to the radio, monitor everything that happens, and keep a log of everything that's happening. And I remember turning to her and talked to her just like this. I said, "Hey, what you're doing right now is going to be very important later. And I need you to be as detailed as you can be in making those notes and in running the log." And I said, "Hey, can you do that for me?" And she just looked at me and she nodded. She said, "Yes, sir, I can do that." And then from there, I went around to everybody else that had a very important job, talked to them, said, "Hey, here's what I need you to do for me." And I ultimately brought the temperature down in the operations center, allowed everybody a chance to focus, and then we could start to figure out what the heck was going on, and finally got the situation under control. But, being a leader, you got to know how to meet the organization where it is and how to get them what they need at the time of need. And again, if you got questions along the way, please ask. But one of the things I want to talk about, comes up, you talk about military environments and you talk about fear, right? And that's it's a factor in military operations. There's scary situations out there. And now, Josh, let me start with you. How do you, how do you recognize fear in yourself, in your soldiers, and do something about that when you're in these kinds of environments?
So the thing about fear is it's a lot of times, guys, it's a matter of perspective. You might be sensing fear. You might be going through something that if I watch you go through it, I'm like, that's terrifying. But maybe you're not as terrified. So as we talk about some guys with some military experience, we've done some things that are dangerous and scary for sure. But as I've reflected with groups this morning, the biggest fear I carried through my military career was the fear of failure. And I may have mentioned it when I introduced myself, but I've got 4 daughters. 2 are in college, 2 are in high school, about y'all's age. They carry fear. I know you sit here with fear, and probably the biggest one is you're scared to fail, and that can be a good thing. To Colonel Novosel's question is how we transition that fear. So for me, what that meant is as I was learning my job and being a member of a team, I was scared of letting you down as my teammate. So that made me show up and work hard. It helped me show up and work hard. I might naturally not have worked as hard as I did if I wasn't a member of a team. So being surrounded by people, taking that step to put yourself on a team. And even if the thing that your team is doing is objectively a scary thing to do, the fear of failure and your hard work to displace that, your hard work to not fail, you're too busy not failing to be worried about the bullets flying or the injury that might happen to you. I'll impart that to you as a piece of military. And this goes for whatever field you go into, you're going to experience fear. And the other piece that I wanted to connect to that, and I just lost it actually. There's another aspect to the fear piece, but I'm sure we'll come back around to it. But for me, my main fear was a fear of failure, and that displaced some of the physical fear. Oh yeah, it's the vignette. The example that I have is I jumped out of an airplane for the first time in 1998. But as I was training, I went to the airborne school in the United States Army. And I trained for like 2.5 weeks before they ever let us jump out of an airplane. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And when I got to the edge, I was terrified. But I jumped. Not because I'm brave, but because I didn't want to let the person behind me down. If I didn't jump, he couldn't jump. You go out in a line. So that's a little example of a fear that I carried, a fear of just jumping out of an airplane. But I was more scared of failing the team.
Thanks, Josh. And John, if you can't, expanded upon that or thinking about, how do you get in front of fear? Like prep people to lessen it.
There was a card on my bunk when I started at West Point on the 1st of July, 1971. It said, if you think you're beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you like to win but think you can't, it's almost a cinch you won't. Life's battles don't always go to the bigger or stronger man, but sooner or the one who wins is the one who thinks he can. And so with some self-confidence and some, grace from God, you can get through a lot of things. And for me, I am terrified of heights still today. That's why I went to the Army Airborne School, to learn to jump out of airplanes, to control that. I went to Ranger School afterwards. Ranger School, you descend to a place where you think physically, emotionally, mentally that you can't go, and that's only the first 24 hours, and you continue to descend after that. 56 days later, you walk out and they pin a tab on you and you realize you've accomplished something. 50% of my class didn't graduate. As you can see, I'm not the biggest or strongest guy around. It's that will to continue to persevere. And the point to those two things is you need to take the opportunities to put yourself way out of your comfort zone in an environment where if you fail, yeah, you fail. You look bad. It's the fear of failure. Like Josh said, as a surgeon, it was fear of failure. If I failed, somebody was going to die. So I couldn't fail. And that was my biggest fear all the time. So find those environments where you can train to try to overcome and discipline yourself, but also the important thing is to remember to look at the people around you, because they're going through the same thing you are. And their level of fear may be higher, it may be lower, but you need to read their body language, to look at them, and every now and then just say, hey, how you doing? Life sucks here today, but it's going to be okay. We're going to make it.
Thanks, John. One of the things I'll share with you as well, I mentioned to the previous group, and I'll mention it to you. I was a worrier when I was younger. And I had to learn how to deal with that, to perform, almost to the point of being paralyzed sometimes. And I recently read a book called The Upside of Stress, and related to it, a podcast, Simon Sinek, I listen to him a lot, talks about fear and excitement. And what Simon Sinek talks about in this podcast is interviewers talking to Olympic athletes, and the interview will inevitably ask, hey, before you won that gold medal, were you scared? Like, and they inevitably will say, no, I was excited, right? Yes, before you won that silver medal, were you scared? Like, no, I was excited. And it's the difference between what the interviewer would feel in that situation and what the Olympic athlete feels. And in this book, The Upside of Stress talks about a stress response and what it is. And it's when something that you value is in jeopardy, your body physiologically responds, right? And it's the pulse rate going up, it's the sweat, your palms get clammy, you feel something different inside of you. And it goes back to when we were, running around the Serengeti getting chased by tigers. And, how you deal with that matters. And what the book talks about, and Simon Sinek talks about, is recognizing that your body is really gearing itself up to perform. That stress response is your body's physiological reaction so that you can perform better. And it's how you recognize where you are and what you're moving forward to do, and you can treat it as feel a failure, like, hey, I'm going to do this hard thing, and there's a real good chance I'm going to screw it up, right? And that's fear. Right? Or you can look at it with a growth mindset of, I'm going to go do this hard thing, and I'm going to do the best I can to be as great as I can be. And that with that growth mindset, now you're excited, right? I'm excited to go do this thing. And it's about how you interpret it and what you do with it that matters. And I'll tell you, for me, it's hard to do, and it's taken a lifetime of practice to try to get to a point where I can do that for myself. But that is something I've had to train myself to do over time, to embrace it for what it is and turn it into something that's a net positive. So question in the back. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. When I was in that environment, in a lot of very stressful environments, my training, going back to what we talked about, my training had got me to a point where I had a good idea of how to respond, and that had taken years of practice. So a lot of that worry had gone away by that point. But what it really was, I think what was going through my mind is something that Josh mentioned, is I can't let everybody down right now. Like, I was the highest ranking person in the room, and I was the one that was in charge of figuring this thing out. And immediate response I had was, I need to take care of this organization and do what it needs to do. And it became instinctive. I recognized Sergeant Major was not helping. I recognized we didn't have a good handle on what was going on. And it was, at that point, it was just instinct. We'd been trained. I had gone through a whole bunch of stressful times. It was my second tour in Iraq. And by that point, it was just, okay, it's time to just execute. So.
Can I jump in on that a little bit? The thing I would add, and Colonel Novoselic touched on it, but preparation is so important. So yes, there's a fear of failure, but that's only part of the recipe. The other recipe is you've spent a lot of time and effort preparing, practicing. If you want to take it out of military for a second and put it in the sports world, Your coach puts your team in pressure situations in practice so that it's not, you don't feel it the first time in the game. And then when you are feeling a pressure situation in a game in the early part of the season and it goes one way or the other, that helps you later on. So one of the things that, in my experience, is every mission that we went out on, we rehearsed. We prepared for intricately. So that preparation had also a very powerful psychological effect on me as a leader. And it'll be the same for you when you join a team, whether it's military or otherwise. The time you spend preparing yourself helps you displace fear. Because you're like, no, I know what this feels like because I practiced it before it was real. And then when it's real, you fall back on your training. You have a mix of falling back on good training and a fear of failure. And those things displace the fear feeling and help you execute.
Great point, Josh. John, anything to add on that?
No, I think you've expressed it very well. I think one of the things we didn't mention in the previous groups is that because of your training, you will step up and you will do the things that are necessary. About a half hour to an hour after the incident is over, you will get this tremendous wave. That's when sort of the emotional adrenaline of fear will hit you, but it will be after the event because you have trained so well that you carry through that event, but it's afterwards that's sometimes the difficult part.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll add on that is, a lot of times that worry, that fears come in anticipation of something. That dead time before you go act is super challenging. Whether it be, for y'all getting ready for a game, getting ready for an interview, getting ready for an exam, whatever the case may be, that idle time in your mind, can get the best of you. And for me, it's all about that. That's my cue to act, to go do something, to study, to rehearse, to go talk to the soldiers. If I'm stressed out about what's coming, I know the soldiers are. I'm going to go talk to them, see how they're doing, check in, kind of calm things down. And it's really a lot of that fear happens before the event. Once you're in the event, then you're in free fall, and you gotta adapt as things move on. But that idle time ahead of time is time that can be productive or can be destructive, depending upon what you do with it. So, really great question. Any others? Okay, yes, ma'am. That's a really great question. I've got a couple things that come to mind, and so I'm a ski patroller in some of my free time, and I have on more than one occasion had to work on a broken kid on a ski slope with a very distraught parent that is being counterproductive at the time. And one of the things, it goes back to the way you interact with human beings, and they are not trained medically most of the time, but there are things that you can have them do that they know how to do. And one of the things as ski patrollers, we try to do whenever there's bystanders, usually you respond by yourself first, and you got more things to do than you have hands to do it. And so being very calm, like I did with the RTO, and just saying, hey, can you do this for me, right? And a lot of times with the parents, I've asked them, hey, there's a whole bunch of other skiers coming down this hill. It would be really bad if one of them hit us while I'm working on your son or daughter. Can you go direct traffic for me and just help me, help her, or help him? But just recognizing what they are capable of doing, meeting them where they are, being calm and say, can you do this one thing for me? And that is typically the start of it. And once they're into the moment and they understand what's going on, a lot of times they'll start responding in ways like, oh, well, I can do this thing too. Can I help with that? But just getting them into the moment and focusing typically allows things like that to start happening more constructively. Hopefully that helps. And Josh or John?
Yeah, I would just say, I would offer in response to that question that it's in so many ways it's the same. We're speaking to you from inside the military, and I assume based on the question that you don't have military service. So outside the military, you're like, how do you deal with this? It's a lot of the same way. And from the inside the military, I was raised by school teachers. I don't know how teachers do what they do. That terrifies me. So it's like, it is so much an item of perspective, but it really is connecting with human beings. Empathy comes into it, and that's exactly what Colonel Selch is talking about. And I want to toss over to Colonel Yorchek, but there's so much more in common with military leadership and school leadership or business leadership or athletic leadership than there is that makes them unique, I think.
John?
Yeah, I was, my situation, as an orthopedic surgeon, I trained into a military hospital, but we took care of all the civilian trauma in the northwest corner of El Paso. And so if you can imagine, back then, 18-year-olds still able to drink, no helmet laws, a little bonus, a little motorcycle, a flat highway down to Alamogordo on Saturday night payday was not a good night. And so I had seen so much before I ever went in the actually combat and stuff like that for the trauma. But I think one of the things that is really critical is the empathy and understanding and treating people like you want to be treated. Because we'd have civilians come in there and they would be so distraught, and you'd have to sit them down, and sometimes you'd have to give them horrible news in the worst day of their life. And so you just have to learn that control. And so mine's a little different in that my whole life has been dealing with trauma since I became a physician.
Can I jump one more?
Yeah.
95% of military leadership is super mundane. You guys watched that video this morning they were playing in the auditorium? That's not the military. I mean, it is, but it is a misrepresentation of what it takes to be a military. What it takes to be a good military leader is patience, tenacity, and just a good work ethic. Because your days don't look like that. It's very mundane. And so as I think about the different leadership in extreme situations, of course, those things happen and there are extreme situations. But in my trade, in my first trade and profession, there was a lot of mundane, and it recalled on some of the same leadership skills that it would take to lead effectively in a non-military organization.
Great point, Josh. And we've got under 10 minutes left. I know there's some questions. One word that John just mentioned, and it actually came out of a question in the first session. So I want to dig in a little bit to the idea of trauma. We've all, the three of us have experienced some very traumatic events, and how we deal with that, to sustain an organization and sustain people really matters. And so, John, if I can start with you, just kind of your experiences in the aftermath of trauma, and then Josh and I can chime in.
So I'm going to give a quick vignette here. It's a little bit graphic, but it really drives a point. The gentleman came in, his leg was barely hanging on. The anesthesia guy's saying his pressure is, 100. John, his pressure is 90. John, his pressure is 80. Well, as you're getting down to 80, we're getting incompatible with life here. And at that point, I just finished the amputation quickly. I turned around. The nurse is fumbling with a big red bag. At that point, he's going, John, his pressure is 70. We're losing his pressure. And I turned, and I just took 2 steps, and I dropped the leg into the corner. I went back, and as I turn around, I'm holding my hand out. And they're just slapping clamps in my hand, and I'm clapping all the bleeders and stuff. And they're pumping blood as fast as they can. And he goes, okay, we got him. We kept him. So a couple weeks later, the nurse would talk to me. And we'd been friends. We always went to church together. All of us went to, a group of us went to the chapel service they had. A lot of us ate lunch together or dinner together. Wouldn't talk to me. So I finally went and approached her. For me, dropping the leg was just an expedient. I needed to focus on the mission, and the mission was to keep him alive. the leg was nothing. To her, I had been disrespectful to that person. And so her perspective was totally different than mine. And so you have to understand that your people that are working with you, you can look at the exact same event and come to a different conclusion as to what should have been the outcome. So we didn't have post-traumatic stress debriefs in Somalia. We didn't have combat tourniquets. We didn't have effective air evac. Those were all lessons learned. And I think that's one of the things that you learn in extreme environments is you got to learn from those lessons. It's bad to make a mistake. It's terrible to repeat the same mistake. So you want to learn from those lessons, have that debrief. And we didn't have that opportunity. And I think they've subsequently developed that, and Brian and Josh's units had that opportunity to have those post-incident stress debriefs.
Yeah, that's one thing I'll add. So, in Iraq, came into contact, we got in some fights, and one of the things our chaplain brought forward for us is, he mentioned learning from previous wartime experiences, and he made sure whenever the unit had the ability, as a group, if they went through a traumatic event, we sat them all down and they got a chance to process and talk to each other. And as a leader, the squad leader's in there, platoon leader's in there, whatever the case may be, you get to see how everybody's doing and how they're sorting through what they saw. And for the group, they get a chance to understand that I didn't go through this alone and other people are working through this same thing. And it gives you the ability to meet people where they are, let them talk about it, and ultimately kind of understand that they can process things as a group, and they're not alone, and other people are going through that as well. And so that was a super powerful way to help folks along with some of that. And Josh, anything?
Hey, so guys, we're down within the last 5 minutes. What other questions do we have? Right back here. Yep. Okay, great question. The question was, if you didn't hear, how do you help members of your team that are having trouble getting over their fear? Like so many things, it's situationally dependent. Sometimes you have the luxury of taking time with that individual, learning the root of the fear and working through it. And sometimes you don't have that much time. And you've got to, I hear you, but we've got to move, and we need you to take care of your job. And then later you come back. So situationally dependent, but the characteristic is still the same. That person needs to be heard. And you need to be let's say you need, like I'm talking at you. Effectively what you try to be, and some days I got it wrong and some days I got it closer to right, is try to be an empathetic leader that recognizes what and feels what your team members are going through. Again, and sometimes you've got time to really nurture that and like understand, step back, learn, and go. And sometimes you're moving faster, and you got to recognize that. And sometimes you got to be very directive, and that's not unloving. You show love by being directive. And then when there's more time, affords, you can talk more about the root of the fear, learn where he or she came from. To Dr. Yorchek's point, that nurse had a lived experience that was impacting her interpretation of an event. That's real. We all have different lived experiences. So you've got to, if you skip by that as a leader, if you just bury that and like, no, you're not thinking about it right, because you think the way you're thinking about it is the only way to think about it, those are the beginnings of an ineffective team. And hopefully one of your peer leaders will catch you up on it and be like, hey, that's not how you do. Good question. I don't know if that got added or not. Add to? Yeah.
Yeah, we got time probably for one more question, so I want to go back to the audience. Anything else on your mind? We've got about 2 minutes left. So really good. Over here. Yep. Yeah, we're here now. How accurate is the movie Black Hawk Down? I'm going to go to the resident expert on that one.
So the scenarios of the combat and the sequence of events is pretty realistic. The hospital scene at the end is just Hollywood, so don't even think about that. I don't know if I mentioned, I did 22 cases in 34 hours, so it was total chaos. The The battle scenes are pretty good. I've been fortunate. I've been asked to come back to the unit for the 30th, the 20th, the 25th reunions. And the last one, they actually put a huge map as big as that room back there. And each chalk, which is a helicopter, each helicopter went up, put where they were, and said what they did on the objective. And so actually got to listen. The people that came into the hospital, some of them were wounded hours before, some of them were literally minutes before I had to operate on them, just depending on how badly they were wounded. So it helped put it in perspective. And so there are some errors in any historical book, if you read any historical stuff, even from Steve Ambrose. But yeah, so the hospital, no, the rest of it's pretty good.
All right, thanks, John. And I don't know if we have time for one more. Maybe we take one more. Another question out there? Yeah. A bad boss or a bad boss or a bad decision by a boss. I have judiciously said no to my commander more than once in various different reasons, for very good reasons. I have had to go to my commander who had given me an order to do something, and I've had to tell him, sir, I'm not going to do that. And typically it's followed by the sentence, because I don't want to get anybody hurt or killed right now. And so that's kind of the level of gravity by which you gotta say no outright. And then you gotta explain all the reasons why. And not only that, as a leader, you give the commander or the leader, but here's what I can do for you, and here's the way I can accomplish what I understand your intent to be, right? But it's never the no, I'm not gonna do it. It's always the, I'm not going to do what you just told me, but I'll do this, right? And then in again, situation dependent, if there is more time and your leader, your commander says, I want to go do this, and you don't necessarily think it's the right thing, you can do the homework for the commander to explain, again, the same thing. I heard you say this, and this is what you want. I think this is really what you mean and what we are more capable of doing, right? So just kind of turning that around. So,
if I could just jump in and leaven that a little bit too, is, and I got a story, but I'll start with this. Is sometimes you don't know, but most of the time you won't know. You think your boss is a bad boss, but you just don't know enough yet. I try to tell my daughters this: like, you think like your teacher's wrong or your boss at the ice cream shop's wrong. You just don't understand, and that's going to be true in your career at stages. I mean, as a 20 years in the Army, I look at my boss and I'm thinking in my head, I don't think that's right. I have no idea what I just don't know enough yet. So remember, when you think that, you might not know enough yet. And then sometimes you just got to do it. My boss, we were in Iraq and we were doing a thing where we were putting in concrete barriers along the sides of the major roads to try to keep the roadside bombs from being effective. And I remember as a company commander, I thought the plan wasn't very smart. I told my boss, I said, if we just, because we would get to a certain point one night, because we do it during the night, and then we start again the next night at the same point. So if you were a guy that was putting in a bomb, where would you put the bomb in? Right where we just finished. And I told my boss that. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. They're going to just put a roadside bomb at the end, and then tomorrow night when we come out, it's going to blow up. And he said, I got it, but we're going to still do it. And we did. And it happened. And I lost a troop. He wasn't killed, but he was wounded in action, had to be evac'd, almost lost his lower leg. Because exactly what I thought was going to happen happened. Does that make me right? Nope. Was my boss wrong? Nope. I mean, because he knew, he had a bigger picture of things. And so it's not ever, it's a great question, but it's not ever easy.
thanks. Really, really great questions, all of them. And I think we're out of time. But we'll stay up here if you got anything else. And enjoy the rest of your day.